Or if it's better than music, it's jazz.
Well, hello and welcome to this inaugural episode of a brand new series I began today. This is The Backward Glance, my retro look at 4 of the most iconic Star Trek series of yesteryear: Classic Trek, The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. I'm your speaker and fellow Star Trek fan on this end, Lal Winstrom, and I invite you to join me in these forthcoming explorations and reflections on some of my personal favorite episodes across this quadrangle of series. Now, with what you're about to hear over the next weeks and months, I hope to combine 2 of my favorite forms of entertainment, of course, Star Trek, and jazz music, as my interests in jazz and Star Trek are both long-standing and long-loved. Out of courtesy, allow me to say that this episode, indeed this entire look back, will be filled to the brim with spoilers. Spoilers from the individual episodes and across each of the 4 series themselves. As such, I will, of course, provide notice before the start of our discussions, but if you've never seen these programs before, be forewarned. With that said, I begin these reflections with one of the finest hours of Deep Space Nine's 7-year run. From its 6th season, episode number 19, we wade into the perilous tides of war in the Pale Moonlight.
Captain's personal log. Stardate 517... Computer, what day is it?
Stardate 51721.3.
It's only been 2 weeks. I need to talk about this. I have to justify what's happened, what I've done, at least to myself. I can't talk to anyone else, not even to Dax.
Captain Benjamin Lafayette Sisko, commander of the abandoned Cardassian military space station Terok Nor, rechristened as Deep Space Nine, sits alone in his quarters, struggling with his conscience over the cost of drawing one of the Federation's most avowed enemies into a war against its greatest foe to be feared yet, the Dominion. The Federation stands upon the precipice of defeat, and Captain Sisko, a gallant officer of its exploration and space force, Starfleet, plots in secret to deceive the heretofore neutral Romulan Empire into joining its struggle to save the Alpha Quadrant from total and complete conquest by the Dominion. Now, this is a story told in retrospect, in flashbacks. 2 weeks have passed since the captain's shocking deeds, and yet he still feels shame to such a degree that he cannot even correctly process what day it is. The guilt runs deep, for it is not merely the path of drawing the Romulans into the Dominion War that Sisko treads. It is the means by which he arrives at his destination that are so vile. His motivation, interestingly enough, is not grand galactic strategy, nor the salvation of the Federation, or of Earth. It is not even the personal loss of a family member. No, none of these great big things, these great big objectives we would think might motivate a Starfleet captain to compromise his oath, his uniform, ideals that Sisko holds so very dear, are what push the captain forward. To the contrary, his motivation is quite simple: a casualty list.
I suppose it started 2 weeks ago, while I was posting the weekly casualty list in the wardroom. Every Friday morning for the past 3 months, I've posted the official list of Starfleet personnel killed, wounded, or missing in the war. It's become something of a grim ritual around here. Not a week goes by that someone doesn't find the name of a loved one, a friend, or an acquaintance on that damned list. I've grown to hate Fridays.
For 12 weeks, Captain Sisko has posted the names of Starfleet officers lost to the war fleet-wide. Fleet-wide. This is a list that could represent hundreds, Thousands, even tens of thousands of officers lost on a weekly basis. The toll will add up for any line officer who cares about the people under his command. And despite what every good Starfleet commander has always been admonished to do, to keep distance between himself and his crew, it's not so simple, especially when one comes to care about their crew like family. Now, I don't want to be so reductionist that I boil Sisko's reasons down to a list of fallen soldiers alone. No, it's much more involved than that. But what I found interesting about this moment when I first watched it all those years ago was how something as simple as a list of names could compel a man to pursue such lowly objectives as murder and conspiracy. And though Sisko does not intentionally go about these things, at first at least, as he steps further into this world of stealth and shadow, some of these actions become inevitable, particularly as he enlists the help of someone for whom such deeds are commonplace. Enter Elam Garak, resident Cardassian citizen aboard DS9 and former clandestine operative of the dreaded and ruthless Cardassian security agency, the Obsidian Order.
If you want to guarantee that we obtain evidence of a Dominion plot to attack the Romulans, I suggest that we manufacture that evidence ourselves.
Maybe I should have put a stop to it right there. Maybe I should have said, "Thank you very much for your input, Mr. Garrick. I will take your suggestion under advisement," and gone back to my office and forgotten the whole thing. But I didn't. Because in my heart, I knew what he was saying made sense.
By now, Garrick's expertise in such dirty business has been long established in the DS9 timeline.
You are not just a Cardassian. You are a spy, an assassin, and a saboteur.
I know I've done some unfortunate things in the past, and I regret them.
And so it does indeed make sense, given the overall circumstances, for Sisko to go to Garrick and seek his help. But it makes sense beyond just this. For Sisko knows, as Garrick himself will later state, that he possesses both the skills and the required dastardliness of mind to carry out such ungentlemanly acts, and, as Sisko might subconsciously hope, perhaps, leave him out of the loop. But this is not what happens. The plan begins, I suppose you could say, innocuously enough. We will bring a noted Romulan senator to DS9, trick him into believing that top-secret evidence of a Dominion plot to invade Romulus is imminently in the works, send him home with such evidence, where he will then convince the Romulan leadership to act in their own defense against the Dominion, and we, that is, the Federation and its allies, by default, will gain a new partner in the war. But this road is not so smoothly traveled. For even before Romulan Senator Vreenak comes on board DS9, the plan begins to slowly but surely unravel. The man whom Garrick chooses to fake the holo-recording is freed from a Klingon prison on Sisko's influence with the highest levels of the Klingon leadership. And once on board DS9, Grathon Tolar, within hours, proves himself a brigand unable to keep a low profile and stay out of trouble, which forces Sisko to bribe the station's Ferengi bartender into keeping quiet. The official Cardassian recording device Sisko and Garrick will use to save the fake hologram proves so difficult to procure that Sisko must trade one of the most dangerous biological compounds in the Alpha Quadrant just to get it. Compromise after compromise begins, like a falling cascade of dominoes, with each more distasteful than the last. Meanwhile, Grathon Tolar's skills as a forger able to create a hologram that can pass the most rigorous of tests is put to question, a skepticism that, if proven true, will cause the whole enterprise, as Garrick so gently puts it, to fail. And once Senator Vreenak arrives, Captain Sisko faces challenges of his own in trying to convince him to abandon the Romulan Dominion Non-Aggression Pact and side with the Federation, a body which Vreenak firmly believes will lose the war in short order. And he presents evidences to back up this conclusion, evidences which Sisko can but barely refute.
The Dominion shipyards are operating at 100% capacity. Yours are still being rebuilt. The Dominion is breeding legions of Jemadar soldiers every day. you're experiencing a manpower shortage. But most important, the Dominion is resolved to win the war at any cost. You and I both know the Federation has already put out peace feelers.
And though Sisko counters with some persuasive arguments, he at last fails and is forced to play his trump card, the assertion of a sneak attack against Romulus by the Dominion, and the presentation of the data rod as proof. But this gamble also fails, spectacularly, for once it is finally examined, Vreenak vehemently announces it a fake. But this is not the end. Sisko soon learns that Elim Garak had his own plan, a plan B, if you will, in case the data rod failed to convince Vreenak. Garak destroys Vreenak's shuttle, making it appear as an act of deliberate sabotage by the Dominion.
You see, when the Tal Shiar finishes examining the wreckage of Vreenak's shuttle, they'll find the burnt remnants of a Cardassian optolithic data rod which somehow miraculously survived the explosion. After painstaking forensic examination, they'll discover that the rod contains a recording of a high-level Dominion meeting at which the invasion of Romulus was being planned.
And then they'll discover that it is a fraud!
Oh, I don't think they will. Because any imperfections in the forgery will appear to be a result of the explosion. So, with a seemingly legitimate rod in one hand and a dead senator in the other, I ask you, Captain, what conclusion would you draw?
That Vreenak obtained the rod on Sukata, and that the Dominion killed him to prevent him from returning to Romulus with it.
Precisely. And the more the Dominion protests its innocence, the more the Romulans will believe they're guilty, because it's exactly what the Romulans would have done in their place.
And let me take a moment to, I guess, kind of go on an aside here, if you will, a tangent, and say that this is one of the few instances in which we see the true, really dirty, dastardly character that Garak is capable of being. Many times in DS9's history, when we are confronted with the reality of Elim Garak and his former association and membership with the Obsidian Order, it is treated somewhat with somewhat of kid gloves, if you will. It's treated kind of hands-off and gentlemanly. Garak is always presented to us as a very nice fellow, if you will. As I put it in another video, congenial, rational, even-tempered. But here you get to see the real Elim Garak, or at least what he's really capable of when it comes down to it. This man is a killer. He is an individual who is capable of doing some of the most vile and disgusting deeds, and as he later says in this very scene, that is in fact why Captain Sisko came to him. Because Captain Sisko knew correctly that Garak could do things that he could not even perhaps contemplate doing, never mind actually carrying out. And this is something that I think really is punched home in this scene. And it's one of the things that I think makes DS9 a much more, if you will, realistic and enjoyable Star Trek at that level than any of its predecessors or its successors thereafter. Now, this is not to say that we have not in the past had evidences of the other captains, at this point, Captains Kirk and Picard, walking the line, as it were. And I think that there are examples of these things, and I'm going to point out a couple of them here. As I thought about this episode, that is, this DS9 episode in the Pale Moonlight on my first viewing 26 years ago or so, at that time, we were about 4 years we were about 4 years beyond the series finale of The Next Generation at that point. And DS9 had long found its own stride by then. But I still couldn't help but think, as I watched Sisko do what he did, would Captain Picard have done something like this? Or what about Captain Kirk? Well, In the Next Generation episode I, Borg, when given the opportunity to order the genocide of the Borg collective vis-a-vis a geometric virus that had been invented by Geordi and Data, Picard was initially gung-ho to carry out this plan, but he afterward changed his mind when confronted with evidence contradicting many of his earlier assumptions about the Borg. And in the original series episode, A Taste of Armageddon, we got to watch Captain Kirk walk very close to that line himself. When he threatened to plunge Eminiar 7 into war with its neighbor Vendikar in a bid to save his ship and crew from destruction. Captain Kirk at that time was willing to risk a real war between Eminiar and Vendikar versus the computer wars that they had waged for 500 years in order to force the two sides into a viable peace. Now, here were two examples where you saw two very upstanding Starfleet captains really get ready to do some very, very horrible things, if you will, in the name of protection and defense, both of their individual crews and, to a larger degree, if you will, to the defense of Starfleet and the Federation. Check this out in particular, this interaction between Captain Kirk and Anan 7 in A Taste of Armageddon.
You don't seem to realize the risk you're taking. We don't make war with computers and herd the casualties into suicide stations. We make the real thing, Council. I could destroy this planet.
Why do you think I don't let you talk to your ship?
I don't need the ship for that.
You mean all by yourself, with a disruptor, you can destroy this planet?
That's exactly what I mean.
I had no idea you were so formidable.
You seem to think I'm joking.
These are the attack computers, Captain. That one's defense, that one computes the casualties. They're all tied in with a subspace transmission unit, which keeps them in constant contact with their Vendican counterparts.
Yes, go on.
The moment contact is broken, it abrogates the agreement between the two warring parties.
What are you gonna do?
This one's the key. The circuit is now locked. Destroy this one, and they'll all go.
Good. Get them out of here.
Oh, wait a minute. Please, please.
Let's go.
You realize what you have done?
Yes, I do. I've given you back the horrors of war. The Vendicans will now assume that you've broken your agreement and that you're preparing to wage real war with real weapons. They'll want to do the same. Only the next attack they launch will do a lot more than just count up numbers on a computer. They'll destroy your cities, devastate your planet. You, of course, will want to retaliate. If I were you, I'd start making bombs. Yes, Councilman, you have a real war on your hands. You can either wage it with real weapons, or you might consider an alternative. Put an end to it. Make peace.
Now, I realize some will say that Captain Kirk was only bluffing, that he had no true intention of provoking a war between these two peoples, that he wanted Anan 7 and the Eminiar Council to only think he was serious, to only believe that he'd plunge them and the Vendicans into a real conflict. But, you know, even if we were to assume that that was just some supreme bluff on his part, well, I would say that he bloody well took it right to the edge by destroying Eminiar's attack computers and ending that whole 500-year absurdity, as he put it in a previous scene, one way or another, by destroying Eminiar with a simple disruptor, as we saw him do with his phaser in that last scene. So, to borrow a phrase from the southern portion of these United States, I don't think Captain Kirk was just whistling Dixie, as they might say down south. I think he meant business every step of the way. But, you know, And I didn't even address, by the way, the situation with Picard in Iborg, and nor did I address how he got in trouble with Starfleet, specifically Admiral Alina Nechayev later on in the series when he reneged on his decision to destroy the Borg with this virus, and of course Admiral Nechayev called him out on it quite sternly, in fact, if you remember that episode. Nor did I address, for that matter, the situation where he changed his mind again and thought of the Borg as a mortal enemy whom must be destroyed at all costs in Star Trek First Contact, until his mind was once again, and his conscience was once again pricked by others during that movie. And it's not my purpose to examine that here, but it is something to think about, isn't it? This is the edge that I'm speaking of here, not simply as expressed by, an individual in their manifestations of some personality quirk or maybe some trauma that they've endured or perhaps some flaw in their character, but as part of the larger crop of decisions that they have to make every day as Starfleet officers, especially as senior command officers. When you're out there on the edge of the frontier, far away from command headquarters, a long way from the Admiralty and the bureaucracy of Starfleet and the Federation, you are responsible for making major decisions that could literally change the shape of the galaxy forever, to alter the destiny of whole worlds and peoples forever. And this is where we recognize the tremendous power that a Starfleet captain has in its hands. And it's this tremendous power that Captain Sisko exercises here in the Pale Moonlight. And even though, he knows he has to stand alone in his action, he can't tell his crew, he can't talk to Jake about it, anyone really. He has to hide that truth and live a double life, at least for the duration of the operation. And even then, it's a secret that he'd have to take to the grave, more than likely. And though there are others who know, like Elam Garak, such as those at Starfleet Command who authorized Sisko's plan, it's ultimately him who must bear the burden and the brunt for conceiving the plan and executing it, and he who must bear the moral and ethical responsibility for the consequences of carrying it out. To use the great 1960s program Mission Impossible's take on it.
As always, should you or any of your IM force be caught or killed, the Secretary will disavow any knowledge of your actions.
In other words, this is one of those above top secret wartime covert actions that will never be declassified, at least for 100 years, well, if ever, really, long after Sisko and those who plotted with him are dead and turned to dust in the ground. Really, in its own right, we might be tempted to think of this as a scheme more worthy of Section 31 than some mainline Starfleet officer who is not even, for that matter, attached to the clandestine operations of Starfleet intelligence. No, instead, it's a regular, everyday Starfleet captain who conceives and executes this plan, recognized and lauded throughout Starfleet though he may be.
And if your conscience is bothering you, you should soothe it with the knowledge that you may have just saved the entire Alpha Quadrant, and all it cost was the life of one Romulan senator, one criminal, and the self-respect of one Starfleet officer.
Now, in the end, we see that Sisko makes this half-court shot with a major assist from Elam Garak. And, well, actually, I would probably say that this is more like a full-court shot with a major assist from Garak. But, Sisko goes on to tell us that the Romulans formally had declared war against the Dominion at that point. They began taking the fight to them the very same day, striking 15 bases. And he tells us that even through the major costs involved to him personally, to those who died to carry it out, if necessary, Captain Sisko would do this all over again, and that he would learn to live with it, even as he, as we could see through the scene, expresses some self-doubt that he actually could.
Because I can live with it. I can live with it. Computer, erased that entire personal log.
Now, let me just say right here at the conclusion of that scene, I really loved that scene, the ending of that episode, and to me, the express brilliance of having Cisco erase the entire log as if it was only, because it was, a self-confession, as if you were going to, I don't know, maybe your personal confessor, your father, confessor, priest, or whatever, and it's only between you and him, but this is in fact only between Cisco and his own personal conscience and the computer record that recorded it and subsequently, of course, deleted it. But it just struck me very, very poignantly to watch Cisco in this situation when I first saw this episode all those years ago, and I really, really enjoyed this the entirety of the way this episode was set up as a flashback sequence, not showing anything in real time, not showing anything taking place live, as it were, but showing how all of this is from Cisco's perspective, watching him shed his conscience, shed show his remorse at this situation, yet at the same time justify it. And when you see other elements in there, such as when he is shedding his clothing, if you will, he sheds his uniform, he takes off his uniform, he becomes quote-unquote more comfortable confessing the whole situation, but then realizes that there can be no formal or official record of this and says, computer, erase that entire personal log. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. And I think it's one of those things that makes this entire show work in the end. What I would have liked to have seen, though, and this is one of the things that I found about Star Trek across the years, at least the earlier versions of it, that I think has probably been improved upon in some of the later shows, that is the follow-up, the follow-up to consequences to these types of actions and their long-term repercussions. Of course, we've seen things like that in microcosm with Kirk and Khan, from Spacey to the Wrath of Khan. We've seen it, of course, with Captain Picard and his Borg evolution, or the evolution of the Borg, along with Captain Picard's evolution of how he dealt with that entire travesty, that tragedy that happened to him, and how he recovered from it. But, at the same time, I think that there were other interesting shows that, such as this one, that came along in the Pale Moonlight, that came along that did not, in my opinion, delve deeply into how some of these things affected people over the long term. And I would have liked to have seen more about how Cisco dealt with this situation in his personal life, as the show progressed towards its end. This is a part of the Dominion War arc, of course, that would conclude with the 7th and final season of Deep Space Nine. But in the end, this episode was a brilliant episode, in my opinion. It ranks up there with one of my favorites of all time of the DS9 series, and it's one that I have watched over and over again throughout the years since it first premiered. And I hope it is one of your favorites as well. I hope you've enjoyed this look back, this backward glance of In the Pale Moonlight with me, and I look forward to sharing more with you as together we reminisce and remember those days gone by. I leave you now as we began with the composition of the great jazz saxophonist Richard Elliot from his 2005 release, Metro Blue. This is Mystique. To all of you Star Trek fans of good character and noble ideals, to you in whom that flame of the upward reach of man still burns fervently, until next time I bid you live long and prosper. And remember, as Commander Riker said, it's better than music, it's jazz.